Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual bootcamp pre-recorded session for disease detectives. This is a life science event for divisions B and C. I'm Dr. John Lord, Vice President of STEM Education here at Science Olympiad, and I'm happy to be the one to take you through and kind of talk about this event. Um, like all of the pre-recorded sessions, got four big objectives. Want to talk about the event itself and kind of review, I think, skills that if you can identify and the students bring to the table in advance will make things go a little bit easier for them relative to the event, and definitely I think can make things easier for you. I want to highlight some important things to know about the event. We'll talk about changes from year to year. We'll go through some resources that I think could be useful in helping you prepare the students. We'll talk about student characteristics and things to look for if you're trying to match students to this event, and some things to consider about who best might fit an event like Disease Detectives. And last but not least, we'll go through some preparation strategies to give you some ideas on what might happen in practice or kind of how the year could look getting ready for this event. Real important, I want to make sure everybody understands that for this session, as well as all our virtual bootcamp sessions, everything was done using draft rules. That means there may be some changes when the final rules come out. So you're definitely going to want to make sure in September, first Tuesday after Labor Day, you download the official rules from the Science Olympiad website, because it's those rules that you download that are going to be the basis for all competitions in the 2025 season. Last but not least, please keep in mind that the information and comments I make and the things I'm going to share with you today are my thoughts about how the event might work. And it's really how I would approach it and what matters to me if I were coaching it. I fully recognize that not everybody may do it this way. There are multiple ways to approach these Science Olympiad events. I fundamentally believe there is no one right way to do Science Olympiad, just like there is no one right way to coach kids in whatever activity you might be doing. It's just my hope to throw out some new ideas, and maybe you can walk away with two or three that can help you for your season. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the event. Disease Detectives is a core knowledge event in our life science category for both middle school and high school. And the big thing here that we're hoping students will do is we want them to demonstrate their understanding and skill in the scientific study of disease, injury, health, and disability in populations or groups of people, right? This is a public health event, right? We're trying to get kids to understand how science works to help kind of help people stay healthy as through public health activities. In terms of coming to this event, I think there are three things that you really want to hope this kids bring to the table. One, and probably most importantly, is pattern recognition, right? Of so much of the work in public health, it kind of depends upon people recognizing patterns and seeing similarities and seeing how things kind of work together. Then data interpretation, right? This event, the kids are going to get a lot of information, a lot of data, both in kind of word problem form and the written word and laid out, but charts, graphs, all those kind of things. So you want kids that are kind of good with doing that. If they already have that, it's just going to make things go a little bit easier. And you want some critical thinkers, right? Some people that then are able to take what they're seeing with the pattern, what they're seeing in the data, and kind of come to some conclusions and draw some big ideas out of it. Now, you probably, if you depending on where you are watching these videos, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before, but fundamentally, you got to start with the rules when it comes to being ready for Science Olympiad. And for me, that's always up in the right-hand corner of a rule page, because that tells me what kind of event I'm dealing with. In this particular case, Disease Detectives is a core knowledge event. That means the students are going to have to learn a bunch of stuff that we specify here in the rules, and then they're going to have to take that knowledge to an event, right, to a tournament, and use it to answer a whole bunch of questions. Now, there are then two sections that kind of guide things after that, right? One is the event parameters. And the two things I'm looking for in the event parameters here on a core knowledge event are, what resources can my team bring with them, right? And bring into the room to help them do better, right? Also, what kind of calculators, if any, are allowed in this event, right? And that's spelled out in event parameters. Then we get to section 3, the competition, right? And that's going to talk a lot about the format. So are there multiple activities going on? Is it going to be, are the kids moving around the room in form of stations? Is it just strictly sitting at a desk and it's going to be paper and pencil stuff? A lot of that kind of things and those options are spelled out here in the competition section. But most importantly, in the competition section, you're going to want to look at the event content. This is where we spell out the things the students need to know before they get to the tournament. These are the kind of things that we're going to ask questions about. And then last but not least, I always want to make sure you do a quick check on the scoring section. Almost always for a high core knowledge event, it's going to be high score wins. So the more questions you answer correctly, the better your score. Better your score, more likely you are to win the event. But also, really importantly, I always stress this section because I think kids can leave points on the table and leave opportunities behind if they don't understand the tiebreakers. And more often than not, in a core knowledge event, you're going to be told the rules are going to say select questions are going to be used to break ties, which is fine. That's perfectly normal. Great way to do it. But the thing is, your kids are going to want to know what those questions are, right? So make sure if the event supervisor at a tournament doesn't tell them right away, right before that event starts, somebody asks the question of, hey, what are the tiebreakers? Because I can tell you, I've seen answering tiebreaker questions be the difference in teams' rankings, where some teams may not have answered all the questions on the test, but they skipped ahead and made sure they put down answers for the tiebreaker questions versus kids who tried to work every single problem in order and missed tiebreaker questions at the end. So don't sleep on the tiebreakers. Now, important things to know. I think the real thing is when it comes to this event, right, there are 3 kind of big areas, right? That you're going to talk about background and surveillance. So this is kind of like where we got to in public health and some of the history and like how did public health develop and techniques and all that. And how do we pay attention to and how do we monitor the collective health of the population, right? And how does that work? And what information do we use? And how do we report those pieces of information? Then there's going to be material related to an outbreak investigation. So you are going to see, and this is, I think, one of the coolest things about this event, because we're involved with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on putting on disease detectives, you're going to get data from actual outbreaks at various levels of the tournament. And there's great engagement from the public health communities at even the lower level tournaments. So there's going to be a section where the kids are going to have to work through an outbreak, at least one, probably a couple. Then last but not least, there's going to be a section that looks at patterns, controls, and prevention, right? So this is kind of the back end, right? So we're going to start with the basics of public health and how do we track it? What information do we use? How do we figure out what's going on in an outbreak? And then what do we learn from that? How do we prevent it? How do we control it? And kind of where do we go from there? Now, I will tell you, and this is kind of a shift, right? So any questions about like what causes cholera? What are the symptoms of cholera? How much do you need to be exposed to? How much bad water do you need to drink to catch cholera? Or how long it takes from the time I drink cholera or drink bad water to I show signs and symptoms of cholera? That's not part of the event. We're not getting into the specifics you're not going to get questions about the specifics of a disease, right? That's why I said you're going to get a lot of information from reading things and passages and descriptions. Those are the kind of things that that if the event supervisor feels you need to know that, or that information impacts on helping you answer the question, right? That's going to be provided for you, right? We're not going to get into, again, like what causes cholera, what causes malaria, like all those things. That's we're not going to get that specific. There's other events For example, I think a great one, is like microbe mission and entomology are two of those events where you might see those kind of things and be expected to know these things. That's not in disease detectives. Last but not least, it's important to know that there are different expectations for Division B and Division C. So there are some different content that the kids need to know. With the high schoolers being expected to know a little bit more and be a little more in depth on a few things. Now, the great thing is, back to the resources and the event parameters, you get to bring in one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, right? And you can have information on both sides. So make sure you use the space wisely. And we'll talk a little bit maybe at the end about like things and how to think about using that space, but you do get a resource. The other thing about it is, if you want to, you can put that resource inside a sheet protector. The only rule would be that the sheet protector has to be sealed. And the way you seal a sheet protector is the easiest way is just put some tape over the top, so that there is only one sheet of paper in the sheet protector. Now, moving on, changes to the event, like really disease detectives, then the content doesn't change year to year. That's because the change happens in the questions, the cases, the data. So every tournament's going to be look and feel a little bit different because they're going to be using different questions, different cases, different outbreak data, different investigations. So that's where the change comes in the event. And so in some ways, if you have students with prior experience with disease detectives and they want to continue, that can help you out a little bit. Because again, they're just building on their knowledge from past years. Now, when it comes to students for this event, right? I think you're gonna want to be passionate about disease, medicine, and health. You got it. This stuff has to be exciting to you. You got to find these things interesting. Having taken a biology class is great. I probably should have put up there listed a health class as well. If you can get someone that's taken particularly a high school health class, or even if they do middle school health classes are awesome. Attention to detail, because again, I think there's little things, and this is sort of a combination between like close reading and noticing things, right? There's little subtle information is going to put you on the track of what's going on, particularly when it comes to the outbreak investigation. You want to be organized, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Good with math, especially statistics, and not so much that you may have to do some calculations, but interpreting them. And understanding ratios is a huge piece, particularly for the high schoolers. And then you want people that are good following procedures, because the reality is there is a set way, ideally, outbreak investigations work. And you want kids that get used to that and kind of follow the pattern and kind of work through that approach. Now, when it comes to preparation, I think all core knowledge events fundamentally come down to how are you organizing your information, right? One of the things you're going to do in a core knowledge event is the kids are going to have to do research, right? And clearly an event like Disease Detectives, where the information isn't necessarily going to be found in any one class that they're taking at middle school or high school, right? They're going to have to do research, they're going to have to find information, and they're going to want to be able to organize it into a form that they can use and kind of build off it, right? And I fundamentally believe that this should be driven by you, the coach, right? And apply it to all your events. And that's just the simple math numbers, right? There's typically 18 to 20 core knowledge events in a Science Olympiad tournament at any one time, or events that are going to have a test and need kids to research. If you allow everyone to do that, you're doing a lot of extra work. Have your kids adapt to the strategy you want. And then you just can kind of build and leverage that strategy year to year. And as I've talked about in some other videos, it's also going to make it easier if you have to sub students in at the last minute for some reason. So again, I would encourage you to have your own organizational system and apply it to the events, right? You want to make sure the students have the basics. So they understand the note taking. They can tell the difference between what's important and what's interesting. Again, I think one of the challenges you have here is coaching this is kids are going to want to go with the interesting stuff. And that's great. It's what makes the event exciting and what makes the event personal. But a lot of times, the things that I find interesting may not be necessarily important to the overall problem at hand. So you want to make sure they can tell the difference, and you help work with them on making sure they can do that. Same thing with resources, right? Again, there's quality resources versus suspect resources. You want to make sure the kids are working off of the quality resources. They're going to have to do a lot of research. They're going to find a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different ways to think about public health, and a lot of people that want to weigh in on public health stuff, right? It's not always accurate, and there's not always the best stuff out there. So you want to make sure you get the kids working with, and they know how to identify quality resources. Then it comes down to learning stuff and just practicing, right? So quiz regularly. Don't get stuck on perfection, right? It's better to know a little bit about everything than getting just a small sample of stuff right 100% of the time. And I think kids a lot of times can get caught up in, I got to achieve perfection. It's not about perfection. It's about us learning as much as you possibly can. And then, like a lot of core knowledge events, your event supervisors know this stuff and live these fields and live this information on a daily basis. So make sure you go to different places, right? So don't, search the internet. Don't just stick with the CDC, right? Maybe you can find data from your local, your county public health department, or you live in Georgia, maybe you go find stuff from a public health department in California or, Nebraska, or just you look around and find different places. Don't always stick to the easiest diseases to find, right? I'm sure you're going to be able to find a ton of stuff on the COVID-19 pandemic and data. Like, okay, that's great. Everybody's going to see that, but try and find some more obscure ones. Look for some localized Legionnaires outbreaks. Look for some smaller things, right? And that's going to be helpful. One, because not only does it help you in the sense that there's like less numbers and it's the data may be more easy to work with, but also it's going to give you a chance to look at a lot of different sources, look at a lot of different ways that things are presented. A lot of the data and a lot of different data is collected, and what kind of things different sites care about. Clearly, right, it's obvious, work with data and numbers. Don't just get caught up in the memorization and the facts, right? This is really one of those events where there is something to do here, right? You are going to work with data, you are going to work with numbers, you are going to have to do some higher level thinking and draw some conclusions out of this. Make sure you're doing that as part of your practice. And then the other big thing here is I think you want to read. This is also a great one where you can find a lot of stuff, like, set up news alerts for news stories about outbreaks and diseases and those kind of things. And, take a look at as much information as you possibly can. All right. When it comes to resources, definitely I would encourage you to start with the Science Olympiad event pages, right? There's a unique page for each division. We're going to list resources up there. We'll get sample questions. We'll get release tests. We also have the starter packs in the Science Olympiad store. Well, that'll get you some notes and some exams, right? And we're going to try and get some stuff up on our YouTube channel. We got a great, actually, interview that we did a couple of years ago as part of the MySO program with a former Science Olympiad alum who talks about her epidemiology work as part of Doctors Without Borders. And she actually reported that while she was deployed over to Africa. That's really interesting. I mentioned that we work with the Centers for Disease Control on this event. They have a wealth of teacher resources out there. I'd encourage you to check those out. They also have a teacher training program called Nerd Academy with lessons and activities and curricula that you might find helpful. There's the Society for Public Health Education that has teacher resources up there. The World Health Organization has a bunch of information, and they can be a great place to find kind of uncommon outbreaks and diseases. And last but not least, I'd encourage you to check out either Open University or Open Educational Resources, because you're likely to find free textbooks around epidemiology and public health online that have been produced specifically for the idea of making the information available and shareable and out there for everybody to use. Now, last but not least, I'd encourage you to make time to attend our Disease Detective Live session. That's going to take place Wednesday, July 10th at 10:35 a.m. Central. We're going to have Dr. Ralph Cordell from the Centers for Disease Control is going to be on and really talking about the event. Ralph is a practicing public health professional, and he's going to share with you his thoughts about the event and things to help get kids ready. And then he'll do a follow-up session at 12:15, and at 12:15, it's going to be much more informal, and it's going to be a little bit more of a two-way conversation between you and Ralph and other coaches about this event and ideas on how to get ready. Now, at this point, just want to say thanks for being part of Science Olympiad. Thanks for attending boot camp. I hope you got something useful out of this video. I wish you the best on your season. And I would encourage you, if we cross paths at a tournament, please don't hesitate to say hi. I'd love to hear how your season's going and to meet your teams. Until then, I wish you the best